And I just like to take it seriously na parang prayer lang talaga to surpass the challenges na kung anong meron ngayon.
Continua kita celebrar el Pascua, maskin pa na tiempo de pandemia. Because Jesus is the reason for this season. And no pandemic can ever stop the hope, healing, and love that He brings everyone. Partners, na abroad, aquí na Pilipinas, Felices Pascua y Prospero Año Nuevo.
Hope, healing, and love. Hope, healing, and love. Hope, healing, and love. Solid.
Zamboanga, di ato na stay.
Imidya mo.
Solid.
There's something about the gospel that changes you.
God is able to turn your mess into a powerful message.
Jesus is Lord. He's the boss of your life. He's the master.
Christ redeemed you. Christ bought you. You are qualified now.
Real love doesn't just talk, it demonstrates.
And now for today's message.
Since July 1st, every Wednesday, I have posted a video that's designed to help pastors, church planters, and campus missionaries think like a leader and lead like a thinker. On these videos, I typically pick a scripture, exegete that text, and suggest applications for leaders wherever they are in the world. Today's video will be a bit different. While I want to read a scripture, I'll make no attempt to exegete it. Rather, I'll simply tell you a personal story that hopefully will help parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, and anyone who's trying to influence the life of a child, no matter what age, gain a biblical perspective concerning gift giving. As always, my goal is to help leaders, this time parents and others who lead kids, to think like leaders and lead like thinkers. Matthew 2, verse 10 and 11. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. And they fell down and worshiped. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. This time of the year, movies abound that claim to capture the true meaning of Christmas. And usually that true meaning has absolutely nothing to do with the Christmas story recorded in Scripture. Matthew described this first Christmas story with three words: joy, worship, and gifts. They had this overwhelming joy. They had humble, bowing down worship. And they gave gifts. Now, when it talks about gifts in the scripture, it's not the receiving of gifts, but specifically the idea was giving gifts. Here's my story. It was the night before Christmas. We were in Savannah, Georgia. The year was 1989. Our oldest son was almost 4, our second son was 18 months old, and Deborah was pregnant with our third, due in about 8 weeks. We were visiting family in Georgia and Mississippi for Christmas, and then we were going to fly back to Manila loaded with toys and gifts like Santa's sleigh. That was the year that William, our first son, realized that Christmas meant gifts, lots of gifts. And he knew that according to the youngest first rule at my in-laws' house, he would be the second in line to open his gifts. At my in-laws' house, the gifts were typically divided into piles. And there would be a pile of all the gifts from uncles and aunts and cousins and parents and grandparents and whoever that said to William, and all those would be put in a pile. And then there was another pile that said to James. There was another pile to this cousin and that cousin and on, and everyone had a pile of gifts that were to them. Once all the gifts were put in the right pile, they were opened one at a time, beginning with the youngest and continuing to the oldest. And that meant that James was first. He was the youngest of all the cousins, then William, then other cousins and uncles and aunts, and then mom and dad, and finally grandparents and ultimately great-grandparents. As good Christian parents, Deborah and I had attempted to teach our young boys the true meaning of Christmas. We didn't expect much from James, and he was only 18 months old, but we assumed that at this point William understood that it was better to give than to receive. After all, Jesus was born because God so loved the world that He gave. We had recited that scripture a million times to him at this point. Christmas was all about giving, God giving His Son. What happened that night in Savannah, Georgia, let us know that our children had completely missed the point, and we had to adjust the way we would celebrate Christmas in the future. All William wanted for Christmas that year was a bow and arrow. His mind was made up. He knew what he wanted. He would not be denied. He prayed to God for it for weeks, and just in case prayer didn't work, he constantly reminded me about this bow and arrow. One day, just to make sure I understood his request, he said, "Daddy, I want real arrows." A bit apprehensive, I had to clarify, "What do you mean by real arrows?" My 3.5-year-old son said, "You know, the kind of arrows with the rubber things on the end. Real arrows, not just toys." He was as serious as any 3.5-year-old boy has ever been when making a Christmas gift request. Just to be clear, I said to William, "You mean the kind of arrows, the real arrows that stick to walls and windows if you lick them before you shoot them?" That was it. He was so excited that I finally understood. He said, "Yeah, just like the ones in Toys R Us." Now, back to the Christmas Eve disaster scene in Georgia. Here's what happened. James, being the youngest, was the first in the family to open his gifts. And like all 18-month-old children, he was more impressed with the wrapping paper and the boxes and the ribbons than with the toys or the clothes or books or whatever was inside. Perfectly content with a box, he obviously hadn't caught on to the materialistic spirit of Christmas yet. Then came William's turn. As James continued to play with a red bow in an empty box, William anxiously ripped through his first gift in world record time. He completely ignored the contents and immediately tore into the next one. At least James enjoyed playing with the boxes. William only got the wrapping paper halfway off of this one before he tossed it aside and grabbed the next one. As he dug into that, he tossed that one aside and got the next one. Deborah and I discerned that something was wrong here. We looked at him, got his attention, said something like this, "William, maybe you should say thanks and at least act like you appreciate these gifts." On the verge of tears, he responded, "I thought I would get a bow and arrow with real arrows. That's all I wanted, and I didn't even get that. All I got was this other stuff instead," and he pointed to these half-open boxes. Well, the truth is, he did get a bow with real rubber-tipped arrows. He just hadn't gotten to that gift yet because it was buried under a mountain of shredded green and red paper and bows and boxes. That was quite a memorable and frustrating Christmas for us. We knew something was wrong, but we weren't sure how to fix it. A few months later, I read a book that described the scene that I just talked about, only it was happening in another city to another family with small kids. It was sure comforting to know that our experience was not unique, and maybe we weren't complete failures as parents. Right now, I can't remember the name of the book or the author, but the guy in the book not only had the same problem we experienced, but he identified the root of the problem and he came up with a brilliant solution. His solution was so simple. It opened our eyes and changed the way we've approached Christmas from that day until now. On that disastrous Christmas Eve, my son was upset and ungrateful because he thought he didn't get a bow with real arrows. The root of the problem, I learned from that book, was in the word get. His focus was on what he would get. We'll always have a problem, no matter how old we are. Whether we're 3 years old or 30 or 60, we'll have a problem when we focus on what we get. Christmas and all of life is not about what we get, but what we give. The greatest joy and fulfillment comes as we give, never when we get. Based on what we learned in that book, we decided that from then on, we would do our best to focus on what each child would give, not on what they would get. In 1989, we had asked our children what they wanted to get for Christmas. William wanted a bow with real arrows. Christmas Eve came around. It was his turn to open his gifts. All he could think about was what he would get. He was totally oblivious to what others were getting and to what others had given. We accidentally helped him miss the point by focusing on what do you get, by asking him, what do you want to get for Christmas? After that Christmas, rather than asking our children what they wanted to get for Christmas, since then we've asked them what they wanted to give for Christmas, what they wanted to give us as their parents, what they wanted to give their brothers, their neighbors, their relatives, their friends, their teachers, whoever. We started weeks before Christmas, sometimes months, building up the idea of giving. What do you want to give? And we would celebrate with them what they would give. We focused on giving rather than getting. And in time, we watched them, even as small children, get just as excited about giving as getting. In fact, sometimes more excited about giving. The next Christmas in 1990 was so different than that night in 1989. And every Christmas since then, when gift opening time would come around the Merle house, we would put all of William's gifts in a pile, all of James in a pile, all Jonathan's in a pile, Mom's and Dad's in a pile. We would separate them into their own piles. But this time, in William's pile, they weren't gifts that said to William, they were gifts that said from William. James' pile said not to James, but from James, from Jonathan, from Mom, from Dad. We shift the emphasis to this pile right here. This is what you're giving. And we try to downplay what you're getting. We celebrated what was given rather than what we get. Once all the gifts were in their right piles based on who they were from, then each person would take turns and give his gifts to his family and friends and whoever was there at the time. We would celebrate the giving. This way the focus, rather than on getting, was intentionally put on giving. Over the years, our boys learned to be just as excited about giving as getting. They discovered that it really can be more joyful and more blessed to give than to receive. I hope this story will help you teach your children, your grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whatever children are in your life, the joy of giving, not just once a year at Christmas, but all year long.
Sa iyong biyaya, ako ay namamanga. Sa iyong kalinga, panganib ay di banta. Sa pag-ibig mo, palaging ligtas ang puso. Mangusap ka, lingkod mo'y nakikinig. Sa ingay man, bulong mo'y natatangi. Pag-asa'y ikaw, sa'yo puso ko'y tatahan. Sandigan ng puso ko ay nahanap sa'yo, Kristo. Pangalan mo, kanluran puso